Hello and welcome back to Rock Records Reviewed. My name's Adam, and this week we're going to take a look at the top 10 blues albums of all time. Blues, I hear you cry, that's not Rock Records Reviewed. Well, I know I've stuck pretty rigidly to rock music for lists in the past, but I think it's pretty clear that blues and rock are inextricably linked. Anybody who knows anything about rock music will tell you that blues is the music that rock developed from. As John Lennon said, it's the chair upon which all rock music sits. As Muddy Waters said, the blues had a baby and they named it rock and roll. And any of your favourite rock bands, from The Who to Led Zeppelin to Sabbath to the Stones and everyone else, they all pretty much started as blues bands, as did mine. I like to see the blues as a picture frame, because there is a 12-bar blues sequence, also known as the 1-4-5 sequence. And if you're playing strict 12-bar, you are sticking to that rigid sequence. So it's like having a picture frame, but what you put in the picture frame is up to you. And that's what I love about it. Everybody has the same structure to work with, but it's all about the personality and what you bring to it that makes it sound different and exciting and invigorating. And as such, the charisma of so many blues singers is off the scale because they have to stand out from the crowd. This list isn't really a top 10 best blues records of all time. That's daft, because there's so many different kinds of blues as well. There's Delta blues, Chicago blues, West Coast blues, Texas blues, British blues, gospel blues, and so really, I think this is more like a primer. This list, it's kind of like it's somebody who's thinks maybe it's blues is something they're gonna enjoy and get into, what they should listen to. This list has kind of got a bit of that element to it. So as such, I've included live albums and compilations as well, so we get a broad picture of the best places you can go to hear the best blues. The scene I play on in the UK is the blues scene. I have many friends and colleagues on the scene who are absolutely passionate about this music, so I have to be on my game today, or I'm going to get lots and lots of nasty messages from them. I think, in some respects, the blues isn't a music you choose to like. I think the music is so primitive, so earthy. It seems so natural that it's either in your DNA or it's not, because people who end up liking the blues end up loving it. It's just something innate in our personality. And we get very, very passionate about it as well. So, well, look, let's get into it. And number 10 from 1968, Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac, the late, great Peter Green, who we sadly lost a couple of weeks ago. A huge influence, particularly on the blues scene here in the UK. Peter Green had replaced Eric Clapton in John Mayall's Blues Breakers, made the record a hard road with John Mayall, before leaving to form Fleetwood Mac with Mick Fleetwood and John McVie and Jeremy Spencer on slide guitar. And now this blend of musicians had an immediate impact. Despite no singles from this album, it got to number 4 in the charts. It sold over 1 million copies, and it stayed in the charts for 37 weeks, outselling the Beatles and the Stones in 1968. It has a really great infectious vibe about it, this record, and Jeremy Spencer's slide guitar sort of cuts like a razor across Peter Green's warmer, bluesier runs. Shake Your Money Maker, Heartbeats Like a Hammer, some great versions of some blues standards. And also there's a track like World Keep On Turning, which kind of hints at, a songwriter in the ranks, Peter Green, which is exactly what he ended up being, a very, very fine songwriter. Peter Green's touch as a player is so graceful and so warm and so intimate, I think, in a way that other players aren't. And I think that's why he's cherished so much as a player. There is something really, really unique and appealing in his style. And this album is in not just as a tribute to Peter Green, but on merit. It's a great record. At number 9, Down and Out Blues from 1959, the debut album by Sonny Boy Williamson II. Now, I wanted to have a harp player's album in this top 10 because the harp is such an important part of the blues. And I guess my go-to harp player is Sonny Boy Williamson, not necessarily for his harp playing, which is kind of undynamic compared with players like Little Walter and James Cotton and many, many others. But I really love Sonny Boy Williamson's voice. I think he's a really great blues singer. If you don't know Sonny Boy Williamson's voice, listen to Bring It On Home by Led Zeppelin, because at the start of that track, Robert Plant really beautifully parodies and very accurately mimics Sonny Boy Williamson's voice. Sonny Boy had played with Elmer James, Willie Dixon, Muddy Waters. And he has this kind of vulnerable vibrato in his voice, which kind of also goes into a little bit into his harp playing as well. He also always had a really good ear for a hook, so a lot of his songs are very catchy. And on here you've got Keep It To Yourself, Don't Start Me Talking, Is All My Love in Vain. And this album made the Blues Hall of Fame. So if you don't know Sonny Boy Williamson, well worth checking out. And I guarantee you'll fall in love with his singing voice. And number 8 from number 8 from 1983, Texas Flood by Stevie Ray Vaughan. This was the debut album by Stevie Ray Vaughan. I think it's fair to say in the early 80s, blues was a bit old-fashioned. It was seen as old man's music. It was derided. It had a very, very tiny percentage of the market. But fear not, because coming over the hill, brandishing a battered Strat, was its new hero, Stevie Ray Vaughan. Stevie Ray was an astonishing guitar player, heavily influenced by Hendrix, of course, but you know, his fast runs and his attack, he just blew us away with Pride and Joy and Love Struck Baby and Mary Had a Little Lamb. They actually started when Jackson Browne spotted the trio at the Montreux Jazz Festival and became an instant fan and offered them some studio time, and they ended up recording this debut in 2 days. And the sound is tight and it's compact. And, you know, you have that Strat on steroids guitar that really is the game changer. And Stevie Ray Vaughan became the new blues guitar hero for a whole new generation of players overnight. And for throughout the 80s, he was the go-to man, and still is for many, many people who hero worship him to this day. And number 7, from 1959, the debut album by the Wolf, Howlin' Wolf, A Moanin' in the Moonlight. As with so many classic blues players' debut albums, this was really just a compilation of the singles they released in the few years prior to this album, to their albums coming out. Now, Howlin' Wolf was a Mississippi blues man who ended up moving to Chicago, reaching a new audience up there. What happened with so many blues singers from the South is that they started as Delta blues men, playing, often just accompanying themselves on the guitar. But then as more and more people moved up north for jobs and industry and stuff like that, as did the blues players followed them. And of course the cities were bigger, the cities were noisier, they were rowdier, and they ended up, of course, plugging in and becoming sort of electric blues. And doing this at the same time as Howlin' Wolf was Muddy Waters, and they ended up having a little bit of a sort of rivalry going on. What did Wolf have for him? Well, he had a booming voice, this huge booming voice. You can hear it particularly on How Many More Years and 44, a couple of the standouts. The real classic on here is Smokestack Lightning, which is kind of that hypnotic, repetitive rhythm with the Wolf moaning, howling over the top of it. The vocals are rough and raw, and so much of what became live performance blues is in that one song. Howlin' Wolf really is an absolutely towering figure in the blues, as is my choice at number 6, which is The Ultimate Collection from 1991 by John Lee Hooker. I think most people would argue John Lee Hooker's single album, best album, is perhaps again his debut, The House of Blues, but that doesn't have 3 or 4 really crucial songs on it, which I think are so fundamental to enjoying John Lee Hooker. I mean, House of Blues was great. It had Sugar Mama, Walking the Blues, Groundhog Blues on it. But, you know, if you're talking about John Lee Hooker and you don't have Boom Boom or Dimples or One Bourbon, One Scotch, One Beer, or even Crawling King Snake, then I think you're really missing something with with John Lee Hooker. This album, as a compilation album, made it to number 375 in Rolling Stone's Greatest Albums of All Time, which is really unusual for a compilation album. John Lee Hooker was also an exponent of talking blues, which is exactly what you'd expect it to be, where you kind of just talk in a drawl over the top of the beat that's being held behind you. As such, you know, he could kind of go off and improvise, and he'd turn a 12-bar blues into a sort of 13.5-bar blues. You were never quite sure where the turnarounds and the changes were going to be. Must have really kept his backing band on their toes. But he is really one of the instantly recognizable blues characters, and the songs you'll recognize because they've been used on Coke ads and on jeans ads and in all kinds of places in the public domain for many, many years now. I think he had the neat trick of kind of sounding laid back but urgent. You know, the music could be urgent underneath him and kind of on its toes, but he himself was kind of this figure, just, you know, going with it. One bourbon, one scotch, one beer. That seems a neat trick. I think Boom Boom's a good example of that, really. But as I go into my top 5 blues albums here, I think actually now these 5 albums would make a list of the sort of the best blues albums of all time, away from just sort of, you know, giving a sort of overall view of who did what. So from number 5 from 1986, Strong Persuader by Robert Cray. Robert Cray is from Georgia, which is where my dad is from. I'm half American, and I always felt that American side of me was what gave me my real love of the blues. And Robert Cray had been developing a strong following with 3 really, really good albums leading up to this one. But this 4th album was the game changer. The production was more modern. There was a kind of real slick coffee table sophistication to the production on here, but that does it a disservice, because beneath all that crafted surface, some really great blues songs about infidelity, about sex, about evil-minded women's, you know, classic blues subjects. But, you know, with the production, with Cray's really soulful voice, his great singer, this album broke out of the blues genre to sell 2 million copies. 2 million copies for a blues album. And it's no surprise, because the songs on here are great. You got Right Next Door, Smoking Gun, I Guess I Showed Her, and many, many others. This album got to number 42 on Rolling Stone's Greatest Albums of the 80s. And there's no doubt that Cray and this album really carried the torch for the blues on into the 90s. And suddenly, for a while, everybody was making sophisticated coffee table blues albums. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way, even though it sounds like it. It just meant that the blues became a little bit slicker for a while. And number 4, from 1966, The Blues Breakers with John Mayall. We've talked about this album before because I'm a huge fan of it. I really am. Clapton had left the Yardbirds, as is famous. I'm sure many of you know. He wanted to be more authentic. What tends to get forgotten about Clapton, he was a real student and advocate and a torch carrier for the blues. He studied it, you know, intensely. And anything that wasn't the blues got him down, just like, you know, much of the Yardbirds' output just wasn't bluesy enough for him. But with John Mayall, he was given free rein to really, really cut loose with his Les Paul and Marshall stack. And guitar playing was never really the same again. I mean, at full volume, you know, Clapton's here firing off fluid lick after lick, playing with attack, aggression. There's a real youthful freedom in his expression and phrasing on this album, and it's really easy to see why music lovers, blues lovers and guitar players were absolutely smitten, to the point where they started graffitiing Clapton is God all over London. This album's full of great songs, All Your Love, Hideaway, Key to Love, and not just because of Clapton. It's a great album, you know, beneath what he's doing. You know, John Mayall is no slouch with the blues at all. He listened to Parchment Farm, which is a fantastic blues recording. This made it to 195 in Rolling Stone's Greatest Albums of All Time. Personally, I'd put it quite a bit higher, but let's see what you think. Okay, so the last three records on my list, these are kind of, if you like, the holy trinity of blues titans. These three guys, and I'm sure you can guess who they are. At number 3 from 1965, Live at the Regal by B.B. King, the King himself. It's, you know, there's some live albums where the performers' warmth and personality just put a glow over everything, and this is one of them. With or without his guitar, whether he's speaking or playing, it's all there. That geniality and love of what he's doing really comes across in all the songs. And then he starts playing on Lucille, you know, his Gibson, and you've got this beautiful, rich, creamy tone coming out. It just punctuates every line that he sings with the classic blues call and response voice and guitar phrasing that's never been more joyous, and of course is part of the lexicon of blues now. Every Day I Have the Blues, You Upset Me Baby, How Blue Can You Get, all B.B. King classics. This album was a massive influence on Eric Clapton or Mark Knopfler, many other players. I think John Mayer's a big fan of this album as well. I mean, thousands of players are, because it swings, it rocks, it weeps. And it really is one of the first stops on any blues guitar player's journey. I got to number 141 on Rolling Stone's greatest albums of all times. I think if you were going to do a live albums list, it would be considerably higher. It'd be right up there. And number 2, from 1960, it's Muddy Waters at Newport, 1960. Muddy Waters is an extraordinarily important figure in the blues, really, and in rock music, because you can make a very good argument that the rock band and the live rock album kind of started here and started with Muddy Waters. Just like we were talking about with Howlin' Wolf, you know, Muddy started as a Mississippi Delta blues man with just him and his guitar, and he went up to Chicago and he plugged in, and boy did he plug in and make the most of that. And you know, he was, in many ways, he's regarded by many people as the first person to have the classic rock band format: drums at the back, bass player, another guitar player or a harp player, and then Muddy in the middle, either with or without a guitar himself. You know, you can picture the, you know, the lineup on any stage, and Muddy was in many ways regarded as the first person to do that. I think Muddy is all charisma. You know, when you watch him playing, he's sitting there like some African chief, serenely in charge of all this sort of exhilarating, exciting musical chaos around him. And then he's up and dancing, you know, as intoxicated by the music he's making as anybody else. Baby Please Don't Go, Hoochie Coochie Man, Got My Mojo Working. These are songs that are played all over the world every night, often by myself. And on this album, they fizz and they're tight, they're tough, they pop. I mean, everything a modern rock band aspires to be. There's a restless energy in what's going on, but Muddy's always in control. And what a band this is. You've got Otis Spann on piano, Pat Hare on guitar, and James Cotton on blues harp. And you can, again, make an argument that Muddy is one of the first true sort of proper band leaders in the blues and rock field. But my number 1 blues album, and it's hard not to put this at number 1, is from 1961. It's The King of the Delta Blues Singers by Robert Johnson. This really is a blues singers and blues writers' Bible. Robert Johnson is unquestionably the most mythic and enigmatic figure in blues. I'm sure many of you know the story. He was a Mississippi blues man, a fairly average one by all accounts, and then he disappeared for a while. And when he came back, he seemed to have this new, you know, talent on a whole other level, which was just mesmerizing people with his playing and his singing. Now, what the myth that grew is that he'd gone down to the crossroads during this time and sold his soul to the devil for his talent. The truth is he's probably just practicing quite hard, but that's far less interesting and less romantic. And what you suddenly had was this high, haunting voice, this ghostly voice, and this absolutely incredible guitar playing. It's extraordinary. It's so intricate. Within the space of one bar, he's pushing and pulling phrases with this intricate finger picking, which people to this day argue about how he's actually doing it. Robert Johnson's enormous influence on anybody who's ever played the blues, whether they know it or not, because so many of these songs, as I said, are part of the blues Bible and have been covered and made famous by other people. Most famous probably being Crossroad Blues, which became Crossroads for Eric Clapton, and Cream. But you got Hellhound on My Trail, Come On in My Kitchen, so many more. Dylan was a huge fan. Clapton's obviously a huge fan. What I love about this record is, you know, you can put it on, and if you're properly listening, you just close your eyes, sit back and listen to it properly. It's haunting, and it just takes you off to another place. It transforms you, and you get lost in the music, and it's like he's in the room playing with you. The album got to number 27 on Rolling Stone's 500 Greatest Albums of All Time. And it was number 6 on Mojo Magazine's Records That Changed the World. And I think these recordings just underline the sort of otherworldly, transformative nature of the very, very best blues. So that's my top 10. I've had to leave out so many incredible blues artists. Albert King and Freddie King, great players who were a big influence on Eric Clapton. Son House is a wonderful player. Listen to his Death Letter Blues. Albert Collins, Lightning Hopkins, and Willie Dixon, of course, who's one of the great blues songwriters, who probably wrote more great blues songs than anybody else. And then you've got some of the girls, Sister Rosetta Tharpe, Elizabeth Cotton, Bessie Smith, just wonderful, wonderful music. But I could only pick 10, and I hope you've enjoyed them. I'm sure you agree with some of the picks and not with the others. But if you're into the blues and you have your own choices, let's talk about it, please, in the comments below. If you're not into the blues, then certainly the top 5 records here are essential go-to albums to check out. But that's it for this week. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'll see you again very soon for another Rock Records Reviewed. Thank you. Bye-bye.